This is great. I can adjust my. I can adjust my. For once, I'm glad I can adjust it so I can't lean back in my swivel chair. Okay. That also makes it a lot quieter because this thing, creaks like an old rocking chair.
Okay. So on the phone.
Oh, sorry. Go on.
So on the phone is Hannah Miyamoto, and we're going to talk about breaking news. Frankly, came out today. Gavin Newsom, along with two other governors, is announcing a Western States Pact. He announced that today in response to coronavirus. Hannah Miyamoto has been talking about California working with Oregon and Washington in some sort of capacity, and that could be a political vehicle in order to allow California independence to happen. That maybe that it would be more likely for California if it tried to reach out and work with other states. So, Hannah, since you're the person in the movement who has talked most about this idea, and since today it appears that Governor Newsom damn near backed up everything you've been saying, what exactly is this pact? What did he say? Why is he saying it? What does it mean? And please come from your lawyer background, please.
Yeah. Well, this is a press release off the website for the Governor Newsom's website, April 13, 2020. We're now having this conversation at 9 o'clock in the evening, in almost 10 o'clock here in Pacific time. And and there's already been, it came out about just before noon, I believe, and it was reported on all the major media and also some of the small medias. I mean, everything from local television in San Francisco to the Willamette Times in Oregon to CNN. And of course, it's all in relation to the COVID virus. And I think the critical things are just these two paragraphs. Joint statement from the governor. That's California Governor Gavin Newsom, Kate Brown, and Jay Inslee, which is California, Oregon, and Washington in that order. Joint statement for the governors. COVID-19 has preyed upon our interconnectedness. In the coming weeks, the West Coast will flip the script on COVID-19, with our states acting in close coordination and collaboration to ensure the virus can never spread wildly in our communities. I'd like to point out that wild spread is actually a technical term. It refers to a situation in which one person is infecting more than one person at a time. If you know what I mean. In other words, it's really very quite simple. If one person who's infected doesn't affect anybody else, or if the average is less than one, then over time the amount of virus in the environment is just going to go to zero. So as a result, that's what they mean by. But if you have wild spread, that means it's going the other direction. So like one person could infect 2 people, who would then affect 4 people, who would infect 8 people, and so on and so on and so on. Just by having one person affecting 2 people, that's enough to have it into the hundreds for one person.
So you're saying the language of the press release by the governors seems to be talking specifically about virology and stopping the spread of a disease.
Well, I want to just point out, in fact, the whole gist of this thing is this talk about how they're going to rely on public health leaders. Public health leaders are people who understand epidemiology, and that means they're people who understand a phrase like wild spread. I'm saying this is a very serious document in a very serious time. And of course, the other phrase is flip the script, which appeared in a lot of headlines on this subject just today. And I think it's because the journalists picked that up right away. Flip the script, it sounds kind of flippant, so to speak, but in fact, it can only mean one thing. It means 180 degrees opposite to whatever the previous situation was, which of course is that the federal government takes the lead, the states cooperate with the federal government. to flip the script can only possibly mean the state want to call the shots, specifically our states. And don't forget, this comes on the very same day that Massachusetts, Rhode Island, Connecticut, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, and Delaware all announced a similar statement, although they aren't so clear. Also, Governor Newsom announced apparently that, maybe on Twitter, I'm not too sure, that there would be more details on this tomorrow. So obviously this is a very fluid situation. This is all coming in the wake of two major factors. Number one is that Donald Trump keeps announcing that he wants the country opened, and even has announced that he can have some, even insisting that he can personally do it with his power as President of the United States to affect what are clearly the interests of the various states, and particularly in an area, and there's all kinds of material that basically says the 10th Amendment says you can't do that, Don. And the other thing, however, is last week, don't forget, we were having a conversation about Governor Newsom referring to California as a quote unquote nation state. I don't think it's too much to surmise, is the right word, infer that Governor Newsom was actually testing the waters and finding out they're quite warm in California for a nation state, that it was picked up, coast to coast really quickly. Particularly interesting was Daily Cause really jumped on it, and Daily Cause is a national source. They said officially that, basically, you know what this means? This means that California is going it alone, and California will do this. And you know what? We're pretty happy with that because, let's not forget, whatever California is doing is successful so far because we're, last I checked, number 5 on the list of total infections. Number 1 in the population. So there's 4 other states at least that are doing worse than us. And unfortunately, the tragedy is New York State.
But point something out real quick, if I could.
Sure.
In the movement, you were definitely the first person that I heard who was pointing out that Gavin Newsom saying a nation state. He's been saying it since his first COVID-19 coronavirus conference, but really pounding down on that on the Rachel Maddow show recently, that very likely could be a political test for announcing this much larger, like, actual legal action. I mean, when he was saying nation state, it was just a thing he was saying. This pact is an act, and you're the first person that I've seen point out that was him likely testing to do this, and he probably already had the pact in mind. Probably, I would say, going on your theory, which makes sense to me, the first coronavirus press conference he gave over a week and a half ago. So,
well, I'm not going to go say that, but I will bet you that if we knew what was going on behind the scenes in Sacramento, Salem, and Olympia, then yeah, they were discussing this last week. That I'm because something like this doesn't just occur inside of a day or two. This is something that was negotiated because we're talking about 3 different states that all had are all dealing with, and each of them have different interests and everything, and they're coming with one common statement. That's quite a statement. That's quite an achievement. I'm sure, frankly, well, I don't want to go any further, but I think that's enough to say that it looks like Governor Newsom, let's put it this way, when Gavin Newsom said nation state, referring to California as a nation state, right, he was basically, he meant we weren't sure what he meant. But I think this statement says, yeah, Gavin, we know what you mean. And I still will say, for the record, that I don't believe that Gavin Newsom wants to be the head of a world power. He doesn't really want California to be independent, but I think he also knows that he doesn't want to see 300,000 dead Californians, not on his watch. Not it's not just a political matter; it's a moral matter.
He's a gunslinger.
He's willing to do what it takes. And that's what a good leader should be doing.
I'm
And
fine.
let's also point out, let's also point out what I'd said earlier as far as Donald Trump, that it's also to me a marker. It's a line in the sand. It's something like that. Governor Newsom, I mean, Donald Trump's been told over and over again, on, you can't just tell the states what they're going to do when it comes to something as serious as a viral pandemic, regarding whether or not stores or restaurants or workplaces are going to be quote unquote open or not. Of course, there's a national United States interest in that, something like that, but those are local decisions which have to be made locally. Now, and what I have said, however, is, and here we now go into the hypotheticals, of course. We're doing relatively well at controlling the COVID virus within our 3 states. There are, in other states, the rise in infections is going up geometrically. I want to remind everyone, those who are not familiar with the science, that this disease has approximately 10 days to incubate in someone before you have symptoms, which means that's why we talk about the isolation period, right? We put somebody, say 14 days, you might have been affected, but if you don't show symptoms in 14 days, then we're pretty sure you're okay. Now, but let's say, like I said, let's say it's out of control in the other 48 states of the union, and we're doing relatively well. Then entry into our state, well, of course, we can always control this. We control the highways, and we control the highways easily by just taking the state patrol out and stopping people. As we all know, California already does that, so to speak, for the sake of protecting our agriculture, right? We have agricultural stations all over the place on all the major highways. So that's easy enough. But railroads are a federal matter. Aircraft are definitely a federal matter. And who really decides whether or not you, Marcus, can get on an airplane and fly anywhere? It is, of course, the Transportation Safety Administration, and that's a federal agency.
Right.
And as I've said, okay, if Donald Trump tells TSA you can let everybody and their brother into California or Oregon or Washington,
Right.
somebody, right?
Take.
This means, I think this means, well, what does it mean? That's sort of the next step, as I'm trying to say. But I think it's sort of a shot. Let's call it a shot across the bow. It's saying that we're going to use our force. We'll use our power if we have to.
Okay, real quick. Let me just summarize for everybody following along. There was a press release by the governor of California. It was also in accordance with the governors of Washington and Oregon. It has to do with coronavirus. The appearance is, and Hannah was great because she has a lawyer background. She kind of pointed this out to me. Everybody's moving here. The appearance has to be as though they're saying, Donald Trump, arm of the federal government, if you choose to reopen the economy, we consider that such a safety factor that we might countermand that. I think nullify is the correct federal legal term for what they're doing. Now, maybe they didn't say that in the press release, but basically it's along the lines of, okay, federal government, you're going to open up the economy. We really had massive impacts here, and we're not going back. So we're not going to let you come in and allow Americans through the federal-owned railroad system, federal-owned road system, federal-owned aviation system, federal-owned seaport system, and reinfect our area. And so if we have to take extra steps to basically counter-direct the orders of the federal government, we'll do that. And I think I'm getting that right, but before you answer that, I do want to point out something you had said, and you reminded me today, and you had said this to me a year ago, so I'm vouching for you. You had said, hey, Marcus, I know you're a hardcore nationalist, which I am. And you go, hey, Marcus, I know you want California to be independent, but didn't you tell me, Marcus, that it's about winning? and that you're a real politique type guy. And I go, well, yeah, that's true. And I go, well, California saying we want to secede and go on our own sounds a little fanciful, like when South Carolina did it. But a coalition of states seems to be more reserved. It seems to be like, okay, maybe I'll secede, but it's not. I don't want to. I'm begrudgingly doing this. It'll be very gradual. It seems a very reasonable, reluctant gun Western fighter type way of doing it, which you had said, and I have to agree here, seems to give a lot of credibility. It makes other countries, other nations, other institutions go, well, they don't seem they're rushing to this. They seem like they're trying to be very prudential about this, prudent. And so do you see some of that thinking going on with the announcement of the Pact of the Three States and the thinking you were saying earlier?
Well, number one, I just want to clarify that you used the phrase own. The federal government does not own railroads, does not own airports, does not own interstate highways. It controls them.
Okay.
And it doesn't even control state highways. It doesn't even control the highways. It controls the airports, and the railroads are, of course, private corporations. So at least the long distance freight railroads. So just to remind you that.
Counterpoint, that's why we have these conversations. That's why I love the fact we're getting this out there. You're right. I was wrong on that. And that's a key understanding for people in California to understand right now, given the gigantic moves we might have to be making.
Yes, yeah. Thank you. Now, as you asked the question about look, I first am very reluctant to make any analogy to what happened in 1861 or 1860, because it's not the moderateness, it's not the pace at which whatever happens. It's the emergency itself. All right. The world is, let's put it this way, right? 11 states seceded from the Union in 1860 and 61 over the issue of preserving slavery as an institution and as a legal institution in their states. The rest of the world did not agree. That's the reason why the South could not really secede. Okay, given the fact that only one other country, Brazil, was the only other country in the world that I could think of that had slavery. And even Russia had just abolished serfdom, the closest thing to slavery in Europe, right? But we're talking about something entirely different, a whole nother barrel of monkeys here, right? It's pandemic disease. It's an emergency. The whole world knows that. The world does not want to see the USA overwhelmed by a pandemic. Certainly our friends don't, and we have a lot of friends. And our friends in the United States, of course, being U.S. allies, long-standing U.S. allies, countries that have been allies of the United States since before the Second World War in many cases. So can't overemphasize that. That, like I said, I also want to point out that I have recently been talking about provisional independence, saying that there's a difference between saying we're out of here, we're leaving, like again back to 1861, we're gone. See you later, pal. And saying this is emergency, and in an emergency, we're going to take action. And we're not going to worry where the chips fall because human life is too valuable. And guess what? I am certain in that circumstance, the whole wide world is, the world, the U.S., the world that matters, our U.S. allies, Great Britain, France, Germany, Japan, Italy, countries like that are going to say, yep, maybe they even say something like, that's what I'd do if I were you. That's the situation. That's going to be the situation. But I don't believe that, in other words, I don't think the three governors or the governors out in the Northeast want a showdown with the federal government. And I want to point out, legally speaking, states have interacted with the federal government, right, since 1789, actually since 1773. maybe, whatever. I mean, whatever, some point. I guess, no, yeah, whatever. I guess President of the United States, technically speaking, whatever. The point is 1780s. For over several hundred years now, states have interacted, and what's happened, the legal term is comity. Comity means that the federal government is superior in some areas. In some areas, the states are totally in control. But for the most part, where there's a conflict, the two institutions are supposed to work together cooperatively.
Hmm.
None of this my way or the highway. I'm Donald Trump. I have total power, which is basically what he said in this week, and that's what's got everyone frightened. Um,
Well,
and you can even see it in the stock market, frankly, because they know that if he really did that, that would be a disaster. But I do want to say that, yeah. I'm saying this, you and I have one perspective, and we're not talking directly with the governors. Only sort of read his actions, for the governors, right? But I think we got to remember what we can at least say we know what their interests are. Their interests are preserving human life. Their interests are protecting the people of their states. That's what they swore an oath when in office to do. Let's not also forget, by the way, that behind those governors, isn't it, are attorney generals and state legislators, and especially speakers of houses and things like that. I'm sure they're all 100% behind these people too, because they have equal concern for the welfare and longevity, well-being of the people of their states, their own families, if nothing else. So,
if I could real
yeah,
quick,
this is a serious matter.
for
Of
people
course.
So, yes to everything you're saying. And last time that I recall, a couple states said, we're getting together specifically for the intention of telling the federal government, we're not going to do what you say on X, was 1861. So I'm not saying legally it might be the same, but politically it seems real close. And I would point out, in the 1950s, the federal government did say, oh, did you not want that, states? I don't care. I'm having armed troops march into your town. Now, I supported that decision because it was for enforcing diversity. But to many Southerners, and I have family in the South, in Texas, they are still mad about that. And it's 70 years later. And I have to say, while I disagree with their morals, legally, if you don't support that decision, that was a very concerning event because it did say the federal government can march troops in and force its will on you, even if it's against the will of the people of that local area. And that's a relevant historical example. How serious is this? Trump reopens the economy. The three states get together. I think this is a warning shot, letting them know, and legally and to the world, that, hey, we're going to do what we need to do to protect ourselves. Also, as we've always pointed out, the California population, and to a lesser degree, Seattle and Portland, are cut off from the main American populations. The Rocky Mountains are a gigantic amount of land. And so, while the population density map, you can see that about 90% of the American population goes from roughly the edge of the Rockies, roughly in the middle of the Midwest, all the way out to the East Coast. There's a lack of population, meaning isolation, until you get into California and then the valleys of Seattle, Washington, and Portland, Oregon. Since we are somewhat cut off, and since our governors have done so well at being aggressive on dealing with this, I think Washington was the first, and then California was the first to announce it not being an epicenter. There seems to be a case here legally, and I could see people arguing to an international court. Hey, Europe. Hey, Japan. Did we do anything wrong here? No, I don't want to break apart America, but isn't it my job as leader, as elected in a democracy, to protect the people? I'm sorry, but you see what I have to do in the federal government. They're literally not declaring emergencies, and now they're taking our ventilator equipment. Dire times. And I think what I hear what you're saying is the governor's being politically very shrewd right now by letting people know, hey, I'm reluctantly moving to this, and I'm doing it in a way where my legal manner for doing it is very clear. So if I ever have to argue legally or politically to the world for international recognition, as you're saying, it's a case that people like Japan and Canada could go, I'm the Prime Minister of Canada, I'm the Prime Minister of Japan, I'm the Prime Minister of another country. I could recognize this coalition by Oregon, Washington, and California because they seem reasonable and they're not doing anything rash and they're doing it as a way to protect their people. And I, as a Prime Minister of Japan, would not seem reckless amongst my people by saying that I recognize what California, Oregon, and Washington are doing because of the nature.
Well, let's emphasize that first thing. Remember what I said about comity, right? What it's saying here is that in addition to saying we're going to decide this by the state, which means that we're going to decide this on the basis of health outcomes and science, not politics, will guide these decisions.
Right.
So, after all, again, in the court of public opinion, world public opinion, if that be, there's absolutely nothing that says that Donald Trump cannot use health outcomes and science to decide when they would be useful or appropriate to reduce the social distancing guidelines. Right? That would be fine. And maybe it might not be absolutely okay, but right now we're in a situation where the one notable expert who's in the eyesight of Governor of the President Donald Trump is Dr. Fauci, and Dr. Fauci is being attacked, including by Donald Trump on Twitter. And his days seem to be, there are all kinds of speculation. There's a political death watch, if you will, of when he's going to get fired. So, same time, got inspector generals being fired. We got the fact that Congress wants to investigate what the heck's going on, and he's, it could go on and on. But the point is that we're not saying that we're going to do it. We're not saying we're going to. There's a legal concept here called arbitrariness. Our criticism of Donald Trump is that he wants to do it arbitrarily, based primarily on some notion of economic impact.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And it has never before been doctrine in the United States law that economic impact is going to prevail over human life, over public health and science.
Right.
Okay. Right. And if now I'm going to be speculating here. We are in a world where Donald Trump has appointed hundreds of federal judges. It's possible you could get a federal judge. A federal judge in just now, what was it? Indiana, Oregon, out east. It was out east, and another Trump appointee. And it was Kentucky, and he got really he really issued an extraordinarily intemperate order. He didn't even listen. He issued his order without even bothering to let the city of Louisville, I believe it was, or the state of maybe it was I think it was a sound. This had to do with closing churches or preventing churches from having in-person services on Easter, and he didn't even let the government, the local government, to be even heard in his courtroom, issuing an order, a preliminary injunction against, not a temporary restraining order, but a preliminary injunction against that. Now, at least I believe that's right. I should say I didn't know about that for sure. That has to do with, that's legal stuff. But the point was, this is my concern as a Californian, is that okay, you get a situation where Donald Trump says, I want to open up the country, and that includes you three states out there out west, and New York and all them other states out east. Our doctors, our scientists are very strongly opposed to that idea, and I'm telling people this is absolutely a disaster. Then what happens? Donald Trump tells TSA to let people come into this country. Of course, as we all know, once you're on an airplane, you can get off the airplane you can get out of the system as we all know, right? You get off the plane, They say, thank you for flying. You get up your baggage, there's no checks, right? So there would have to be some police on our side standing at the gate saying, thank you for, welcome to California. Step over here. We have some questions to ask you. Okay. And what's going to happen next? You're going to have a federal judge being appealed to by the Trump Justice Department, is demanding and making some argument about preemption or something, or economic impact, or who knows what. Interstate commerce could be at play. But again, I remind you that, remember, the airports, even the international airports, are owned by local governments. And they do receive federal funds, but they are effectively local government operations. So again, I'm trying to say this is a mess. Legally, this is a real mess. And reasonable judges should line up on our side. The circumstance in the scenario I just gave you, they should line up by saying, yes, human life is more important. I've listened to a bunch of doctors, or I've listened to enough doctors to convince me that I'm not going to issue a temporary injunction against the states. I've heard it. But we're in a situation where you could easily get a federal judge out there who's been appointed by the Trump administration, and or maybe just a Republican, a former, I don't think that, anyways, let's just say it's a Trump administration appointed a judge who just doesn't listen, who just, whatever it may be, they feel they have some kind of, you've heard the whole argument, this is all a hoax. They're saying this is, the Trump people want to say, oh, this is all a hoax, and it's all a hoax, and we're only pushing this because we want to bring down Donald Trump. You're going to have a fight. And at that point, that's the point really where you start talking about independence, provisional or not. That's the point when you, like I said, because let's face it, we've got a highway patrol, we've got a National Guard, we've got a state military reserve, we've got local police. But again, this country has lasted for over 200 years, and very rarely have state officials, state agents been, literally had drawn guns on federal marshals. Okay, but let's not forget, at this time we speak, we've had quote unquote Homeland Security people who have gone into hospitals taking medical supplies in California.
Yeah.
And people are asking that right now, like, and people are saying, well, isn't that stealing? And so on.
Just a couple of factoids for everybody watching in. So yes to everything that Hannah's saying, but as we're going into evolving terms, a couple of things. The Florida governor has said that anybody coming from New York, even if they are a Florida resident, can be stopped at the border of Florida. Now, the way he seems to be doing it is not saying if you're Floridian, you get to come in and everybody's out. He stops everybody. So all American citizens, he has to treat the same. But he has been able to say, I don't care what anybody said. You come into Florida, we're quarantining you. That seems to be holding up. It also matches an interview I did with Sean McBride, a lawyer who can practice in 15 states, where he said, you can't say you're a Nevadan, so you don't get to come in. You have to provide equal service for everyone who's an American citizen. So Governor Newsom would have to treat everybody the same, but he could effectively create borders. Florida governor, he could say, you have to stop at the freeway coming in from Nevada. Oh, I'm a California resident? Well, okay, but you don't get special treatment. We're going to quarantine you with anybody else coming in Nevada and follow our protocols, even if Trump says, I declare the roads open and you can travel, or he declares the railroads open. And, that train starts in New Hampshire and travels on federal managed or legally controlled railroad tracks. We'd have to stop them when they come into California and surround the railroad stations. The other thing is, like you said, the seaports and the airports are private. But I also recall the airline strike, where Ronald Reagan, as I understand, basically created unknown law and said, no, I order you back to work. I don't care if you don't want to. And he forced the airlines open. So there's some sort of something there. Like you said, it's a sticky situation. How do we do this? It seems to me the best option would be we use, like you said, our own state offices and just start saying, well, if you flew in or you took a train in or you took a truck here, I'm not going to stop you from traveling. That's the federal thing, but I can quarantine you for 20 days and make you follow our doctor's ideas. And yes, I can have the CHP insist that you follow our suggestions. Do you see a scenario like that possibly emerging?
Well, first I want to remind you that you're right about Florida getting away with stopping people at the border. It caused a huge traffic jam on I-95, but he did it. But let's also point out that there's been a lot of precedent in which Florida seems to be getting a lot of preferential treatment from the federal government, from Donald Trump's administration, specifically because Donald Trump is really worried about his political future in Florida and whether or not, because he knows that he won't get California's 53 electoral votes, but he could get Florida's 20,
Ah,
whatever, 35,
ah,
whatever, 30. He can get Florida. So he's worried about it, and this
yeah,
is where it goes back to him. So you're right about that being a really good legal precedent to braze. That, hey, if Florida can do it, then why can't California? But again, I just got through talking about how, yeah, with reasonable judges, that would be a good argument. But with judges who are
this
politically
act,
biased,
yeah,
I've been saying this earlier, as you well know. I mean, I've been a lawyer. I went to started law school in 1989. And in 1989, I'm being forced to think about a lot of legal questions right now that my training simply doesn't give me any options because we were always taught there are something called reasonable judges who follow legal precedent, follow statute, follow the Constitution, have notions about public safety, public interest, human values, like human life as a value. Those are, public health. We are just the minimum. The idea that public health, safety, and welfare is the fundamental responsibility of states. That
right.
goes all the way back to at least McCulloch versus Maryland, 1818, under the Marshall Court. One of the most important early decisions of the United States Supreme Court. So that's the law. Then there's the world under Donald Trump. Then there's the Donald Trump legal system. In the Donald Trump legal system, everything is being done on the basis of politics and partisanship. And in that circumstance, I can't give you an answer. But that's, I think, it's like, I think what this is saying is, if you're going to make this about power, we're going to use power too. If you're going to make this about force, we've got force too. And I mean, because ultimately, right? And where does that lead to? Well, it should make a reasonable president take a step back. I mean, you mentioned, I don't even want to really talk about it, but you mentioned Little Rock. I may remind you, okay, President Eisenhower did not simply wake up that morning and order the 101st Airborne to march into Little Rock and take up station, right? He contacted the governor of Arkansas and talked it over, right? Not only that, he was enforcing a federal court order that could not be enforced by any other, because after all, the county sheriff should have been enforcing this laws. It was a federal law. It was a federal court order. Again, after a court hearing in which both sides had a reasonable opportunity to present, as we say, present argument, present facts, brief the whole issue, and what's happening there was the states were simply not following the federal courts. But again, that's a reason. Here, I'm going to make that distinction. Some people are going to think, well, Hannah, that sounds like a very shrewd too lawyerly decision. But I'm saying there is the regional federal court that's using objective standards, and then there's that other thing where which is said, we have a saying, where there's there's no law, because law is no more than just power exerted. It's just more than force given and put in words. And like I said, what's that going to happen? I don't know. But I think they're saying is, don't push us. I think what they're really saying, I guess you could say, don't tread on me. You know, uh, this is really, this isn't a joke, and we've got. I mean, after all, it's not like California, Oregon, and Washington are. I want to emphasize this. It's not like California, Oregon, and Washington are trying to get something over the other states, right? We're hurting. Our economy is hurting very badly. Our economy was
Yeah.
shut down long before the other states did, several weeks before. We've been, I live near San Diego. I mean, you know what? Our tourism industry is flat on its back, because people can't come here and do anything. They can't go to any restaurants. They can't enjoy themselves in any bars. They can't see any plays. They can't go to see any movies. They can't see any sports. They can't, they can't even go on a harbor cruise. This is not a joke, and I want to emphasize that. Remember, again, back to the reasonable law, right? Most cases about state versus federal power involve a state trying to do something to make itself benefit at the expense of the other states. Okay, there is reciprocal impact here. And I think that so this is again a case where the addition that's got to be weighed. That has again a reasonable court would weigh that in. I'm trying to go in my back of my mind about there are cases about I remember I don't want to talk about it. Early 19th century cases involving interstate commerce, and they're sort of on this area, but those were cases in which, well, actually, I will talk about it. Those were cases, Marcus, in which I know you want me. Let me just say this, please. Those are there are cases in the early 19th century, but those are cases in which states were trying to prevent, say, destitute, poor people from getting into their state. And those cases are different. We're not talking about that. There's been massive impact here. We're just trying to protect our own people. And in fact, we'd be happy if the other states would just simply follow the same rules.
I got to go in 8 minutes, but I do need to make two statements. Number one, just for the audience following along, I think what Hannah's suggesting is something that we've been talking about for a while. Hannah was the first one to bring it to my attention, which is that America's broken because of the Constitution. It gives power to small states. They do not share our values. And so you may not have reasonable federal courts being impartial judiciaries. You may have a biased court that says, yee-haw, do whatever Trump wants because wink, wink, don't let him know, but we do whatever he says. I would never do what he says. Totally do whatever he says. And that's legal. They can do that. I mean, people they don't have FBI stings on judges going, were you politically motivated when you were hired? That doesn't happen. So judges can be politically biased. They can be politically motivated. Nothing happens to them. 900 judges, 2 away on the Ninth Circuit Court. I think, am I getting this right, Hannah? I do want to say one last thing and then I'll turn it back to you. It looks like if they erode the judge system, then maybe you would have judges saying, oh, what Florida did is fine, and what you did, California, is totally wrong, and being partial. But real quick, I do want to point out something I've been holding a little nugget here for a while. 2 things. You said something about how Newsom was talking about nation state, and maybe that was testing the waters for this 3-state pact. I remember a couple months ago, maybe only a month ago, there was an article in Newsweek that talked about California and other states leaving and joining Canada in a pact. And that too was by a California writer. What I found interesting was that was a California writer for music. Yet he wrote a geopolitics article and Newsweek published it on the front cover. I wonder if that also was a test. But here's the last little nugget. I'll hand it back over. I think Gavin Newsom might be in love with the idea of a California independence movement. But he can't say it. He's a shrewd politician. He's a smart man. Just a couple factoids. 2009, Mayor Gavin Newsom suggested a UN Global Compact Center, UN office, meaning one of It would be the fifth one in the world in San Francisco at Hunters Point. In 2011, Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom was at a California conference on subnational powers and talked to the professor at the presentation about things that a subnational government could do. When Gavin Newsom was elected governor recently, it was only California flags on his podium, no American flags. He talked about how the feds get in our way. And finally, in 2016, a Lieutenant Governor Gavin Newsom was asked about CalExit. And he said that he didn't support the idea, but he certainly understood where people were coming from. I believe, I think politically he couldn't support it, but I also believe him when he says, I get it. I get why people here would think that. And finally, one last point. Everybody check out that Gavin Newsom CalExit video. It's the only one. He says, I can't back CalExit, not because I don't understand why. I love this place. I get it. But we have to save America. We got to help rescue America and turn it around. Please watch the video because you'll see the audience of 30 to 40 Californians. No one smiles. No one claps. No one supports him when he says that at all. It goes dead quiet, which tells me Californians would rather take care of themselves first. So maybe the governor learned a political lesson, and that's why he moved it closer to saving a West Coast alliance.
Well, I want to say as a Californian, I want to save the United States as well. You know, I mean, I point out to you that I've told you before, I've sworn an oath to uphold the Constitution 3 times in my life. You know, when I applied to the bar in Minnesota, Wisconsin, and Hawaii, I've been admitted 3 times in 3 different states, and I swore 3 times, plus federal courts and even tribal court. So the Constitution is not meaningless to me, but on the other hand, what you said was first, right? If we're not able to save the United States of America from our own little perch here on the West Coast, then of course we have to save ourselves.
Well put. Well put.
Right. I mean, you know, the legal phrase is that the Constitution is not a suicide pact. In other words, it's a mutual suicide pact. And unfortunately, from our perspective, if a bunch of states, although remember, if the Northeast goes and California, Wisconsin, and Colorado, and New Mexico, I mean, we're looking at 20, 25 states. But if 25, let's say 20 states, they all decide that they're all Republicans and they all want to support Donald Trump and they want, you know, and they basically want to commit suicide. I guess they're going to commit suicide. They don't have the right to take the rest of us down with them. And again, I'm appealing now to the weight of over a century of American jurisprudence. The Constitution is not a suicide pact. It's not an agreement for self-destruction. Okay? Remember what I'd said earlier online, too. I'd said, people talk about states' rights, but greater than states' rights is self-preservation. States' rights is a legal or a federalism and all. These are all nice, neat little theoretical questions. But when you're talking about living and dying, you know, this is no longer a issue that you're gonna, you know, you can just nicely discuss on a, you know, we're not dealing with a law school exam. You know, we're not doing con law 2 here. We're doing real life. We're talking about women and children and families, and innocent children, you know, and elderly people who have, you know, given their lives to you know, in their contribution to the society. We owe it to protect their lives and not to just sacrifice them on the altar, the vain altar of economic expediency. You know, you had some Texas governor, I think it was, who said that, you know, I think the elderly with seniors would be proud to give their lives to the country. Well, in our country, only in the case of war, and I mean literal, you know, all-out war, where we draft people, does the country have the right to sacrifice American lives, you know, without consent? I mean, yes, if you join the service, But otherwise, you have a right to say, no, I'm not really interested in risking my life for this country. And so I don't know where he's coming from, basically. I mean, we're not talking about storming the beaches of Normandy. We're talking about, about our elementary schools. I don't see why this is such a difficult question to people.
Hmm. You had said something earlier that grabbed my attention, which is, Newsom might have to have California agencies physically stop people and countermand federal directions, and you might have to have people physically go out there and do that. I do recall California has arrested a California law enforcement officer arrested a federal officer twice, I think, in the last 10 years. Very rare, exceptionally rare, but it did happen. I think one was a drug driving thing. The guy was he was a federal officer. He was on a sting, but he was drinking. So he drove, he crashed into something, and the local cops go, you're drinking and driving. And he tried to go, well, I'm a federal officer. And they go, yeah, but you're drinking and driving. So health and safety. We have the right to take you off the streets for health and safety. And the interesting thing, that was in San Bernardino. And I think that was around 2009. What I found interesting, he was doing an investigation on the cartels. And what was interesting was nobody challenged it. They arrested him. They put him in jail for 2 or 3 days. What happened was the federal judge says, well, that case has to go immediately to a federal judge, and they did some sort of rushed order, so it went to the case like within 24 hours, and then the judge just made it go away. But he just missed it. But nowhere did the federal judge say, hey, San Bernardino local PD, you don't have the right to arrest a federal officer if you think you're protecting human lives.
Well, I might even go further, though. Actually, there's a Supreme Court case. I was looking these things up. Way back in 1920, the United States Supreme Court ruled that a state could not force a federal officer, like say a letter carrier, who is driving a truck to have a driver's license. But of course, it only applied while they actually were on duty working for the post office. So they were supposed to be, they had to literally be walking to the job apparently, and then they could get into the truck, drive around, and they would need a driver's license. But that was 1920. Guess what? Nowadays, yes, postal letter carriers have driver's licenses, okay? And if they had a DUI or something like that, it's going to get pulled. And if it's pulled, they're not going to be driving for the post office unless, of course, the judge lets them do it. That's another subject. But so I'm trying to say is that what happened to that federal officer wasn't, in fact, in violation of the law at all. Then what you're talking about is removal to federal court, and I still don't know how the judge could just let that just be waved away when you're talking about a DUI. But hey, maybe they reported it to his auto insurance company, and they might have just revoked his policy. I don't know.
There was another one where a federal officer shot someone, killed them, and was arrested by local California police for a negligent homicide. They arrested him, put him in the case, same thing. It was fast forwarded to a federal judge who goes, in the pursuit of duty or something like that. But what shocked me was that the federal judge didn't say, get him out of there. You don't have the right to do that. How dare you do that? No one said anything like that. They just quickly got it away, which made me think maybe there's a legal basis here for if you're talking about protecting lives, where state law enforcement can, in specific instances of protecting human life, supersede federal powers, possibly.
Well, like I said, we're getting into some really hairy legal stuff.
True. I'm sorry.
First thing, because what you're talking about is the question of the question of state interference with interstate commerce. And and believe me, many a page in the law review has been written over the years on the topic of whether local activity is impacting interstate commerce. And currently it's very, very broad. Again, I think it comes back down to the Constitution not being a suicide pact, right? Nowhere on the line, nowhere in there does it say California, if 300,000 Californians have to die, that's 1% of our population. If 300,000 Californians have to die, well, that's just the price you pay for having the stars and stripes over your state. Nowhere is it written there. And again, if it were up to me, I would pretty much be, ready to use all the force I had to. But again, I want to give you a brief analogy, a little bit of a story, Marcus. Way back in the 1880s. Now, this is the country of Canada.
Okay.
In British Columbia, in the 1880s, it was legal to sell alcohol, but under in Canada, by Canadian law, said it was illegal to sell alcohol in the western provinces. You got that? So you had the Royal Canadian Mountains. They had the Royal Canadian Mounted Police, literally the red guys in the red coats and everything. Just imagine that image you have, right? Those guys were literally going around and breaking up stills, while the British Columbia Provincial Police were saying we're not doing any of that kind of stuff. What happened was one day one of those guys who got his still broken and his alcohol is confiscated went to the local police saying, hey, the Mounties came along and they stole my stuff. So this guy went over to the Royal Canadian Mountain Police with a drawn revolver and arrested them, held them in jail. Well, what really happened was...
Yeah. Well, let me ask you.
And so let me finish the story, because what I'm telling you is that how was this settled? Not in court. What happened was the local head of the Royal Canadian Mounted Police got the two sides together. Or maybe it was the Governor General, or maybe it was the Governor General's responsibility. This is Canadian government, but literally got a bottle of whiskey and they sat around a table and drank it and talked about this problem. And the Mounties were let go. But they, and so and so there it was. But there actually is, I'm just saying that this is literally, if it took a bottle of whiskey and a chance to calmly talk about stuff, this is the way federal-state conflict should be resolved. Okay, but Donald Trump seems to want to he has, like you say, something to prove. Is that phrase? And I think that. I'm going to put this out right. You can clip this out right now. I'm saying, hey, I'm 100% behind Governor Newsom. I am, as a California resident, I am very glad that he is protecting my life and the life of my family and loved ones. And whatever he does is 100% right with me. And because I trust him, and I literally trust him with my life, and I'm really glad he's taking responsibility. This whole crisis has been all about lack of responsibility. No one's taking responsibility, whether it's people trying to pretend it isn't even there, and if they do, or if they say it's not, if they even acknowledge it, then they don't want to do anything about it. Or if they do want to do something about it, then they only want to do about it for some states, but leave other states in the cold, or they don't tell anybody what the heck they're doing, etc. This is nonsense and crazy. So, we got Governor Newsom. I think every Californian should stand up behind him. I don't care which way they voted. I don't care what party affiliation they have. I mean, if they value the lives of their family members and themselves and their friends and family and their neighbors, I think they should say, God bless it. We've got somebody, and not just Governor Newsom, but he's just one person, but he's leading a team, and they're going to help do their darndest to protect our human life in California. I want to emphasize that right now, that we owe it to him. We owe it to ourselves.
Would you say that you are a Californian and you too say nation state, as our governor did?
Yeah. Nations. I
It's supposed to be a softball question.
it's supposed to be a softball question, and the trouble is that um, you know, and like I said, I like I've said, I think that like I said, I really do say that that nation state is such a you know what I mean? It's such a term. I mean, trouble is, of course, it doesn't really mean, doesn't, frankly, what does it mean much? Of course, I mean, are we a nation? We're not one ethnicity. So that doesn't make us a nation, you
It
know?
was,
Are we a state? Well, our Constitution says we're a state, but it says we're a state within the United States of America. So, I mean, I don't know about that either, honestly. But I mean, Governor Newsom's saying what he's saying, and then he can decide for himself what that means. But what I think it really means is that, you know, we're in a crisis. We're in a crisis that's greater than any we've ever faced. I mean, I don't know if you want to go back 100 some years, maybe we could find something worse. But let's put it this way. I mean, where would you rather be right now? I mean, you know, would you want to be on December 8, 1941, or you want to be on April 13, 2020? You know, yeah, okay, the Japs bomb Pearl Harbor. Yeah, but that doesn't necessarily mean they're going that you know, hundreds of thousands of people are going to die in our state all overnight. So, you know, and as we all know, there was no real danger anyways. We're in a lot more danger now, and I'm glad. By the way, I literally live over a busy road, a couple of busy roads. I live over the California 76 and the California and El Camino Real, and I noticed the traffic is not there. It's you know people are staying home. I know it's tough for everybody, and but I'm glad we're doing it. And that's another thing, by the way. We've sacrificed so much already.
I have
So
2 minutes, and I need to
yes,
say,
we've sacrificed so much already, Marcus. Like it would be a tragedy to just say okay and then let all those people die when we've already that's throwing away everything we've already lost. If we were going to do that, we should have done it from the beginning and just said, let the virus go through and who dies dies. We'll just dig mass graves, I guess, and put the bodies there. I mean, that's what happened. That's what they're like on the verge of doing in New York State. In New York City, they literally don't have places for the bodies. But we didn't do that. In fact, we were, like I said, we were the second state to manage to shut down. And and let's not forget, Governor Newsom doesn't have that much power, but he does have the power of his persuasion. Do you know what I mean? I mean, if I sat down and said, where in the books and the law books does allow Governor Newsom to do what he did, or to you know to shut down any restaurants or stores or whatever, probably nowhere. But there's an example where power is about what people uh, is about leadership ultimately, right? He showed the leadership, and the people said that sounds good, that sounds smart. I'm, you know, and I'm glad you've you know drawn, you know, you've said this, and as I said, I mean, everyone basically made an individual decision, whether it was to shut down their own workplace or whether it was to not work them, you know, to tell the boss they weren't coming in, etc. But I mean, he didn't even have the power, as far as I know, of to shut down the elementary schools. But they're shut, and they're shut because he showed the leadership to urge that to happen. You know,
yeah,
I mean,
yeah. I gotta
that
go.
point.
I gotta go, but I do need to say one thing, if I
Sure.
could. I've always liked Gavin Newsom and thought that he showed great leadership when he first got elected as governor because he went to Latin America on TV and told Latin American people in Latin America, consider us having a separate foreign policy than America. And he was doing that with
Mm-hmm.
incredibly xenophobic. That took real courage to get elected immediately and take a risky move of making a foreign policy statement when you don't legally have the ability to do that in a foreign country, in a foreign language. It was so Californian. I loved him ever since then. Last comment. Um, there was this place called America, and they had a culture that was really similar to the English, and a place called Canada and Australia. And no one has ever said in international law they don't all get to be separate countries. I'll leave it there. I gotta go.
Okay. Okay. Good night.
Bye.
I sure hope the recording works. I'm worried I only got a recording of you and you don't have a recording of me.
No,
Oh,
it's the
well.
same recording. You just have to end it.
Okay. I hope the video